veteran. SDLP MP for Belfast South and Mid Down. Camilla Turner is political editor of the Sunday Telegraph. And Oliver Kamm, journalist and writer for The Times, who's also a former investment banker. We will take your... Everyone's laughing at that now. He's laughing. 0345 6060 973 if you would like to ask a question to our panel, and do watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, former Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford says Vaughan Gething did the right thing in resigning as First Minister. It's after 4 members of his government resigned in protest over his leadership. He lost a vote of no confidence last month. Andrew R.T. Davies, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, told LBC it raises questions for Labour.
Keir Starmer, throughout the weeks since the motion of no confidence was passed here in the Senedd, has been backing Vaughan Gething. And this really does call into question the new Prime Minister in London's judgment and that of colleagues within his own cabinet, the new Welsh Secretary Joe Stevens.
A number of names have been put forward to be the New England manager after Gareth Southgate announced he's stepping aside after the team lost in their second Euros final on Sunday. He says now's the time for a new chapter. The mother of British teenager Jay Slater says she's heartbroken after it was confirmed a body found on Tenerife yesterday is him. The 19-year-old had been missing for a month. It's believed he died after accidentally falling. More than 1,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. 427 made the journey yesterday, taking this year's total to 14,759. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 18 points at 81.64. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.18. LBC weather, showers easing with clear spells developing for many and lows of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. With me in the studio to answer your questions. To my left, Hanna, SDLP MP for Belfast South and Mid Down. Next to her, Lord Willetts, David Willetts, Conservative peer. He was Universities Minister in the coalition government. To my right, Camilla Turner, political editor of the Sunday Telegraph. And to her right, Oliver Kamm, journalist and writer for the Times newspaper. So if you have a question for our panel on anything in the news today, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp the same number and you can text 84850 or say Alexa send a comment to LBC. I think we've got every base covered there, haven't we? And of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, the first question is a text question. It comes from Jamie in York, who wants to know why are Labour doing the most anti-Labour thing and keeping the 2-child universal credit cap. David Willetts.
Well, it's certainly the case that the 2-child limit on benefits is increasingly pushing families into poverty, and the work we've done at Resolution Foundation shows this. But I presume that what's in Rachel Reeves's mind as Chancellor, which is how any chancellor has to see this, is what can we afford? And they've fought the election on a very tough message that we're going to stick with the fiscal rules that they've inherited, apart from some specific areas where they're going to increase spending. And if that's what you've been saying to the electorate in a 6-week campaign, you can't the week afterwards change it.
You said you chair the Resolution Foundation,
don't you?
Resolution Foundation. Now, I was watching Newsnight last night when I got home. Was it last night or the night before? And Fraser Nelson was rather disparaging the poverty figures that you had come up with on this. I think you were saying 800,000 children pushed into poverty after this limit had been introduced. He said that those figures were more or less written on the back of an envelope.
That's not how we work at Resolution Foundation. We have genuine experts who work through the figures, and of course, we then have our internal quality control. We don't just express opinions. We make sure that what we estimate stacks up and is rigorous. And the trouble is that it looks as if this policy, as the years pass and more people are affected by it, will actually cause poverty to increase. And I don't, whether you're pro it or against it, I think that is just a clear fact. I think the challenge, if I may now make a cynical political point, is when you poll attitudes to benefits, there's a lot of people who maybe don't have to, themselves having to take decisions about the family finances and how many children they can afford to have, who support the 2-child benefit cap. It actually polls as the most popular benefit cut you can do. It also does drive a lot of families into poverty. So that is the dilemma for any party. It clearly does have support from people who say we would have loved to have a 3rd child, but we can't afford one.
We were talking earlier about the difference between relative poverty and absolute poverty, and it seems to me that relative poverty seems to be the measure which everybody talks about nowadays, whereas to me, poverty means you literally can't afford to feed yourself, clothe yourself, house yourself or your family. That's not what the meaning that you would adhere to in these figures, though, is it?
Well, you can get absolute measures. What you can choose a point in the past and say what was 40% below average income in the year 2010 and fix that in real terms, and then see if the number of people with incomes below or above that changes. So in other words, you can apply the measure. And in the long run, I mean, there was, all through the great tradition of British political economy, people realised that as society advanced, the things that they needed to have in order fully to participate in society changed. And there were great essays in this going right back to Adam Smith saying, some of the garments that people now expect to have would have been things that in the Middle Ages only a king could have. So, yeah, the world does move on and participation in society changes. But if you want an absolute measure, you can fix a point in the past and then track real incomes relative to that.
Claire Hanna, the Labour Party is kind of your sister party, isn't it? Which side of this debate do you fall on?
Well, I don't disagree with any of that, and the finances are as the finances are, but I hope this is something in the medium term Labour are under-promising and over-delivering on, because if you believe in evidence-based policy, this is one of the main drivers of child poverty. It's not really a policy so much as a meme, going, why do people have so many children then, without actually thinking through the impacts that it has on family finances, and the long and short-term costs of child poverty, and how arbitrary it is, and how many more people are going to be dragged in. I have 3 kids, and actually my 3rd was born 4 days after this policy kicked in, and it brought home just how narrow the cutoff can be. And obviously I'm lucky to live in a house with 2 decent earners, and we both got our health and all of that, but life doesn't always go the way that people planned, and people sometimes make decisions about their family that are then derailed by the circumstances in their lives. And it is about people being able to live relatively dignified lives, as well as, in what you were saying about the difference between absolute and relative poverty. I know as a constituency MP, the situations that people are in, they're not on the pig's back, as we say, people who are relying on subventions like this, and it really does drive people into very difficult places. And there are things that in 10, 20 years ago wouldn't have been essentials, but things like broadband that maybe you think, well, look, if there's food in your belly, what do you need? They are essential to life now. They're essential to working for most people. They're essential to your kids' education, and I suppose they are layering on additional costs to family finances.
OK, Oliver Kamm?
I agree with both of those contributions. The Labour Party is almost certainly tarrying rather than ruling out lifting the cap on child benefit for more than 2 children. I certainly hope it will do it sooner rather than later, because there are real human victims. And you quoted Fraser Nelson, Iain. I know the work of the Resolution Foundation. I've often consulted it. I've consulted it on this subject. And the figures, which I think are very robust and very sobering, do point to a substantial increase in the number of families who are affected by child poverty since this measure came in 2017. And if the Labour Party stands for anything, I did not vote Labour in 2019 for reasons that are not germane to this particular question, but I did this time. And if the Labour Party stands for anything, it is for not absolute uniformity, not absolute equality, but for lifting children out of poverty. And this is a means to do it. The cap does not affect individual or family behaviour, judging by any empirical evidence, but it does affect child poverty. This is a basic moral issue, in my view.
OK. Camilla Turner.
Well, I suppose looking at the issue politically is a difficult situation for Keir Starmer, because having already essentially picked this fight with the left of his party and with Labour MPs who disagree with it, if he were to backtrack now, there'd be an absolute avalanche of criticism that he looks weak, that he's U-turning, that he's a hostage to the left wing of his party. So having already kind of staked his position on this, it's quite difficult, I think, for him at this stage to turn around. Maybe at some point in the future, having done a review, and, you know, it would take the heat out of it a bit. But I think given that he's kind of made this his position, he's kind of got to ride it out for now. Or it just
I think that's exactly what will happen. He'll have a review, he'll appoint someone like Alan Milburn, a safe pair of hands, to chair it, and in 2 years' time, hey presto, Alan Milburn will say, well, we think that this should be reversed now, and Rachel Reeves can say, well, we've got economic growth, so we can do it. Everyone's happy. But you're right, there's absolutely no way he's going to do U-turn 2 weeks into his government, is there? We've got an allied question here from Ben in Clacton. Ben, go ahead. Hi.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Should we subsidise childcare more in order to get caregivers to work longer hours and go back to work, and increase the hours of nurseries between 8 and 6?
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an investment. It's part of the infrastructure that allows people to go to work. And if you look at productivity, sluggishness, and obviously I'm more familiar with Northern Ireland's figures, we are really being held back by people who are underemployed and not able to do the work that they want to do because it's not viable. Many people are kind of staying in work just to keep a foothold in the labour market. But with childcare costs at £65 a day, being far from an outlier, it's not viable for a lot of people, particularly if they have more than one child. So subsidy, I mean, it's not the moon and the sun and the stars. Many civilised countries in this continent have near universal childcare at affordable rates. We lag behind quite substantially, and I think it would allow more people to get back into work. And I think there is a real opportunity, and I think Labour have been exploring and using the school estates, using the buildings and the staff that are already there to try and expand out that provision to more families.
Camilla?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge issue, massive issue for voters, for kind of young working parents. I feel really lucky in that my baby daughter's nursery, she's there full time, 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. and that's something we can afford on mine and my husband's salary. But for other parents,
is that 5 days a week?
4.5. Half day on Monday when it's my day off. I don't want to have her all day. Half a day of me time. But there are other parents I know going back after maternity leave who just said, one friend who is a primary school teacher at a local state school, and said, well, why would I be paid to look after other people's children when I'm spending the same amount on my own baby's nursery? So it just doesn't make economic sense for a lot of mothers to go back to work, even though they like their job. So that's obviously not great for the economy, and kind of something that needs fixing by the state.
Oliver?
Yes, it is investment in infrastructure. My one caveat is that if you look at the employment record of successive Conservative governments since 2010, jobs is actually one thing that on paper has gone right. Employment levels have been very high. The employment rate has been high. The unemployment rate has been low. The problem is that many of these jobs have not been paying very well. And this sort of measure, investment in care, in childcare, would enable more women to do more things that they want to do in the workforce for higher pay and increase demand in a sustainable way. So I think it makes a lot of economic sense, but with that caveat.
David?
There is a pitfall here, and it's a good example of how well-intentioned policy can have perverse effects, which is when you say, Ben, subsidised childcare, what can happen is governments can say, yes, we should have free childcare, and they specify the amount that they will provide to childcare providers per hour for the childcare. And they say, of course, it's got to be free. You aren't allowed to charge anything on top. And the childcare providers can say this is less than the actual cost of childcare. And a well-intentioned policy drives nurseries and childcare providers into severe financial difficulties, and some of them can't deliver what they were delivering before. And so it's just a good example, sadly, of how even well-intentioned policies can have damaging effects. And I would rather proper payment for the actual costs per hour than have a political auction of adding extra hours all the time but underfunding them and driving the sector into a financial crisis.
I think that's a really important point, because it is eye-catching to say, oh, in this manifesto it's going to be 30 hours or this, and it's often then the extra costs are pushed on to babies or the care for younger children that aren't caught up in that. And again, these are a low-paid job given the skill and the care that's needed.
How can they be low-paid jobs? Did you say you were paying £65?
I'm not. My children are a little older now, but right. It's far from unusual. I think a cost of a full-time nursery place, somebody who works in my office, I think they pay $12,500 a year for a full-time nursery place, and that's for one child. And again, if you have more than one, obviously your costs drop when the child's in nursery. I promise, or in school. I promise. You're in the trenches now, and it'll end. But you need to. At the moment, we managed to get a little bit of a win in Northern Ireland. I worked with Treasury and some of the ministers and it had to be a direct intervention to parents. But if you look at the tax-free element, which is one thing that the government, a tool they have been able to use, that 20% hasn't changed for years, and the costs have gone up and up and up. So maybe it does need to be an intervention at the point of payment.
I'm going to utter a sentence that I never thought I would utter, but wasn't Liz Truss right when she said that, and this was like going back way back, I think, when she was in the Department of Education, that it's ridiculous to have is it a childcare carer can only have, is it 4 or 6?
The ratio.
Yeah.
How many?
I think it was 5, and she said you should be able to go up to 8. Yeah. There are some genuine questions about how you get the regulation.
But in France, it is 8, isn't it? So, I mean, are French children that much
It's also really important to say that there is a massive, we know that when children get to nursery and primary 1, their educational outcomes are almost set out. That 0 to 3 period is so important for their development. So there's a real opportunity to decrease inequality as well by making it child development and not just minding the children. And if you drop the ratios, there's a potential to lose that. But there's probably a centre ground there.
Ben, great question. Thank you very much. We'll move on in just a moment. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
18 minutes past 8. In the studio, we have Lord David Willetts, Claire Hanna from the SDLP in Northern Ireland, Camilla from the Telegraph, and Oliver Kamm from the Times. Now, here's a really interesting text question from Amelia in Poole. How can Labour possibly have friendly relations with the second Trump administration now? Lammy has called Trump a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, and now J.D. Vance says Britain under Labour is an Islamist country. Oliver, let's come to you first.
The Islamist country jibe, I think the government, our government, needs to say is absolute nonsense. There is a meme, to use Richard Dawkins' famous neologism, on some parts of the right in the United States and even in the United Kingdom that Britain, or indeed the whole of Europe, is subject to a purported demographic time bomb of Muslim populations. It's nonsense, even applied to Muslim populations, let alone to Islamists, who are a very small proportion of European Muslim populations. And Labour has, in my view, David Lammy has, in my view, probably described the Trump administration, the putative Trump administration, if it does take office, actually pretty well. I don't think it is right to say, as the vice presidential pick has been exposed to saying, that Trump is America's Hitler. But I do think it's fair to say he's America's Mussolini. If you have a presidential nominee for a great historic political party who defends sedition and insurrection, never mind the implication for the global public goods that America provides, particularly security alliances and our own role within the Western alliance, then I think it's fair to say that the greatest democracy in human history, the leading defender of the free world, the leading democracy in the international order, is in grave danger of attenuating and even overthrowing its own democratic character. That's not something we can overlook. That's not something our own government, recently taken office, can overlook.
Camilla.
Well, it's interesting because you can, I'm sure there are a lot of members of the shadow cabinet who have made disparaging comments about Donald Trump in the past. Obviously, now it's a very different situation. They're in power and they need to be having relationships with UK's strategic allies. And I know in opposition, David Lammy was already doing a lot to try and court both Republicans as well as Democrats. So I think these comments could probably be dredged up about just about anyone. And hopefully for David Lammy, that the work he's been doing, his kind of diplomatic efforts in opposition more recently will have kind of done enough to trump his previous comments. And regarding the slur on Labour from J.D. Vance, I think it's actually ironic because the Labour Party under Keir Starmer have done a huge amount to try and stamp out any kind of previous associations that the party might have had, kind of negative associations in that kind of area, the kind of work they did overcoming anti-Semitism and all that kind of factional warfare, I think has really transformed the party.
David?
Well, I think that realpolitik kicks in. Whilst Oliver's right about the principles here, in reality, a British Prime Minister, British Foreign Secretary have to work with an American President and American Secretary of State. And often you have new presidents who think that the special relationship doesn't mean anything and Britain is a irrelevant country, or even these really offensive remarks about us and Islamism. But then they find that there's some international crisis and that Britain is an ally, or that Britain gives them some very useful intelligence about something. We become useful and the relationship changes. And all experienced politicians have got something that they've said before that then becomes awkward. I remember going to America with Boris when he was mayor of London, and I can still remember the train journey. We were then going down to New York, where he was going to see Hillary Clinton, then a senator from New York. He was the mayor of London. And on the train journey, the journalist found what Boris had written in his column in the Telegraph about Hillary Clinton. I think she'd been padding the shag pile of the White House like a nurse in a mental hospital or something. Anyway, it said something really offensive. Yeah. And the rest of the trip was spent preparing for... He said, she won't have read it. He said that someone will have drawn it to her attention. But he was able to have a working conversation with Hillary Clinton. And after all, we're now in a circumstance where the vice president, the Republican vice president candidate himself, has compared Trump to Hitler. So anything that has been said by members of this Labour cabinet, I suspect, is not as extreme as that. If Trump can swallow hard when someone's compared him to Hitler, if he's elected, and I think it'd be really bad for the world if he is, if he's elected, we'll work together.
Oliver, I've just remembered when you compared him to Benito Mussolini. I remember being in Washington for Trump's inauguration and expecting Trump to make a really presidential speech, which he did the opposite of. And I remember saying to my producer, what on earth do I say at the end of this speech? Because I've got to sort of commentate on it. And normally you would just recap what the president said. And in the end, I just said, well, that was the speech that Mussolini could have given. I mean, in terms of style rather than content, but the sort of strutting that he does is very Mussolini-like. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, not to state the obvious, it is really grave because there are examples and recent examples where people haven't been as extreme when they get into power, and we know that's unlikely to be the case with Trump because we've seen this movie before, and he's said the things that he's going to say. Yes, there is cover, the fact that he's prepared to suck it up from his own VP pick, But politicians do have to just deal with what's in front of them, but you can't have normal relations. You're not going to be able to have normal diplomatic relationships. We have to try, but with a government of the type we look like we're going to be getting from the US, and we can't pretend he isn't the person he is just because of everything that's happened in the last few days.
But Trump is not going to change, is he? That's the thing. Even after the assassination attempt, when he sort of came out, well, we want the country to be united and all the rest of it, you think, well, that's going to last 48 hours before his nomination speech, where he'll be attacking the usual minorities, the usual people. I'd be astonished if we didn't get anything like that on Thursday.
The Trump administration, it's not, if it is going to be a Trump administration, is not a tabula rasa. We know what he stands for. We know that he doesn't concur with the idea of the conventions of a constitutional democracy where you accept defeat when you are defeated in a popular vote. He doesn't concur with the...
And he's now got a vice presidential candidate who agrees with that and would have overturned the last election.
Precisely the reason he's been picked. Precisely the reason he's been picked. Trump doesn't believe in diplomacy, will, among other things, bring America out of the Paris Climate Accords, and clearly doesn't believe in the NATO alliance, in which case we, the Europeans, must look to our own resources. And among other things, it points to this isn't the question, but it points to the colossal folly of Brexit, which any British government must now attend to and must face honestly.
And it also, I suppose, underlines the fact that the only thing Democrats have to roll the dice again. They've only got one play left, which is if Trump and Biden were level pegging before the events of the weekend, and now they're not, then the only play left is to try a different candidate, and if it's advantage Trump at this point, and to try and avert this scenario.
He clearly is a sort of threat to the American Constitution, as Oliver is saying. However, I do think it looks from the evidence as if the guy can be persuaded to change his mind on particular areas of policy. Look at what happened on Ukraine. Look at how all the Trump supporters in Congress were blocking support for Ukraine. And Trump was persuaded to change his mind. And actually, I do think that David Cameron and the then British government played a role in that. And Trump stopped saying we can't provide any support for Ukraine. And Bush got his proposals through. So
Biden.
Sorry. Making, maybe he's my age.
At least he didn't call him.
So he got his proposals through. And I remember a conversation with a guy who was one of Trump's advisors, and Trump had tweeted something that had, as president, that was not the policy that the advisor was working on. He was trying to persuade Trump to do something differently. And he explained to me, I said, he's tweeted it. How did you get him to change his mind? He said, I got to see him. I explained to him why I thought we should do something different. And I said, so how did you then counteract the tweet? And this was kind of Whitehall at its best. He said the next tweet began, that said, comma, and then had the different policy. So, that these things... although he's a fundamental threat, I think we will find that these kind of things can happen.
But the picking of J.D. Vance, I mean, particularly on Ukraine, for example, I mean, he's made very clear that he is very anti-NATO supporting Ukraine. And I mean, if America pulled the plug, and I know it's not that easy, and that it has to go through Congress and all the rest of it, but if the president decides that they're going to take a different path. I mean, that could be incredibly serious for the future of NATO, as Oliver says.
Yeah, it would be tragic. It would be tragic. And but as I said, I'm sorry to sound like the optimist when I completely understand all the challenges that Trump would present. But if you've also got a vice president candidate who has changed his mind, and it does look as if the argument, hang on, we've got a Russia, China, Iran connection here. If you are soft on Putin and Ukraine, you are also weakening your position against the strategic threat that preoccupies you guys. That argument may have had some influence in the past few months, and it's the job of the British government, of whichever political party it is, to engage and try to find arguments that will persuade this guy and his advisors to do things that are a bit better than they otherwise would do.
And just before we go to the news, just quickly go around the table. Which of you thinks that Biden will be the candidate? Oliver?
As UK pundits, we don't have an insight into this. I would suspect he won't be, because I think any Democrat would stand a better chance, given that the policy platform of the Republicans is not in accord with mainstream opinion, by which I mean mainstream voter opinion.
Camilla?
I think not.
Claire, you've kind of indicated you think not.
Well, I hope not, and I think not. I
And David?
think the course is set if it's these two candidates, and the only way to change that is to change it up.
I don't know. Biden is very stubborn. And I think actually, oddly enough, the assassination attempt, which was, of course, deeply wrong, but I think that also has taken some of the pressure out, given him some extra weeks. So I think Biden could hang on.
You've been reading my column in the newspaper today. Well, it's actually tomorrow, but it's on the website now, where I've said exactly that. It gives Biden a chance to reflect and think what should be done. But to me, it's obvious that this is giving Trump the assassination attempt, however awful it was, it will have rebounded to Trump's advantage in some way. We haven't seen any polls yet, but I suspect it will. Right. Now, we'll go on to some more subjects in a moment. If you have a question for our panel, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30, news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The Westminster leader for Plaid Cymru, Liz Saville-Roberts, has told LBC she doesn't think it should be up to the Labour Party to pick the next First Minister for Wales. Vaughan Gething stood down this morning after 4 members of his government resigned. Police have issued a warning after 3 people died from fatal medical episodes after a suspected dangerous drug batch. 2 men and a woman were confirmed dead in the South Shields area this afternoon. And Gareth Southgate has stepped down as England manager, saying leading his country has been the honour of his life. He took the national team to 2 European Championship finals, a World Cup last 4, as well as a quarter-final. LBC weather showers easing with clear spells developing for many and a low of 9 degrees.
LBC. Books. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33, we have with us on the panel today Hanna, SDLP MP for Belfast South and Mid Down. Camilla Turner is political editor of the Sunday Telegraph, Oliver Kamm, journalist and writer for The Times, and Lord Willetts, David Willetts, Conservative peer and president of the Resolution Foundation. I think president, do they call you Mr. President?
I wish they did, but somehow our bright young researchers don't feel need to speak to me like that.
Right, let's go to a WhatsApp question from Trevor, who says, with Labour now having a huge majority, the need for an effective opposition with mass centrist appeal is critical. Do you think that we need a return to politics of people like Rory Stewart, Penny Mordaunt and Theresa May, among others, to rebuild the Conservatives? Incidentally, I've never voted Tory and can't imagine I ever would, but I see the benefits of an effective opposition. Well, David, you served for a long time in opposition and presumably don't have particularly fond memories of it. What's your advice to the modern-day Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, the name, people like Rory Stewart, Penny Mordaunt, Theresa May, they're great and sensible people whose judgment I think people would respect. But, yeah, I went through the trauma in 1997, which was brilliantly summarised by one commentator who said, you offer the electorate ham and eggs and they say no, so you say OK, double ham and double eggs, and then they still say no. And I think what we were very slow about post 97, and I was in the shadow cabinet, I take my share of responsibility for this, we thought if we waited, the electorate would apologise for their terrible mistake of having voted us out, and they would realise that what we'd been saying before was absolutely right. That costs you a decade in opposition. You have to reflect on the things you've got wrong. You have to be open with people that you recognise you've made mistakes. I don't think directly saying you've got to be in the centre. Who defines what the centre is? But you've got to say things that you believe to be the case. You've got to make reasonable, calm, constructive criticism of a government, even when it's riding high in the polls. And over time, if you behave well, if you behave sensibly, if you respect the electorate rather than try to persuade them that they were wrong to kick you out, you can find you're getting back into contention.
And do you think there should be a lengthy leadership contest?
I must say, I do think. I'm one of the people who thinks there should be a lengthy contest. And the reason is that I thought one of the moments when our prospects finally started improving in opposition was when Michael Howard, as leader, did kind of give people free range in the shadow cabinet and to go out and give serious, thoughtful speeches about what has happened to the Conservative Party, the direction in which the party should go. As soon as you've got a new leader, everybody has to show they're loyal to the new leader. It can suppress the kind of debate that I think we need. So I personally would prefer a longer, more open debate.
And what about the idea that Ian Duncan-Smith should return as temporary leader, interim leader?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting idea. You could have... I mean, I would have hoped that Rishi Sunak himself would stay. But
we all know he doesn't want to.
I know he doesn't want to, but everybody has their obligations to causes bigger than themselves. And I think that it would be I don't think that choosing an interim leader would itself be uncontentious. So you'd end up with a mini leadership election and then another leadership election. But I think that Rishi himself should stay and allow this kind of debate about what's gone wrong to happen under his leadership.
Camilla?
Well, I would say the thing about democracy is people can choose who they want to be an MP, or MPs can choose not to stand. So in the case of all these people mentioned, I mean, Penny lost her seat, and the others sort of chose to have a graceful exit from politics. They can't really just come back because they haven't stood or no one's voted them in. I mean, I suppose the difficulty for the Conservative Party now is, I suppose for some people, they might have seen Rishi Sunak as running a right-wing regime and therefore want it to go back to the centre. But for other people, Rishi Sunak wasn't right-wing enough, and that was his problem. So I think there's a huge debate that's happening within the Conservative Party about how they remodel themselves and ultimately how they get elected again, because they're a very long way from that at the moment. I think there's no appetite for a quick leadership contest because, frankly, they're not in power, so they can take as long as they like. There's no kind of urgency the way it was when they were actually the government and it was choosing a new prime minister. They're just a bit less relevant now, so they can take as long as they like, really.
Oliver?
I take the view that a Westminster-style democracy works best when there are rational and moderate parties of the centre-left and the centre-right who can vie for office and keep each other sane. Things go wrong when a historic political party goes insane. It's happened to the Republicans in the United States, where an insurrectionist movement has in effect occupied it. It happened to Labour between 2015 to 2020, and it's clearly happened to the Conservatives, which had successive leaders who were in different ways unfit for public office. One because of his conduct in public office, and his successor because of her ideological dogmatism and indifference to the way constitutional conventions work. I very much hope that the Conservative Party, having suffered such a devastating defeat, will now... I don't take the sort of, forgive me, Jesuitical view as David does about what constitutes the centre. I hope that the Conservative Party will turn towards the centre so that it's expressive of people like him, or people like John Major, or my close friend Daniel Finkelstein, your colleague in the Lords. But I fear that this will not happen because the Conservative Party leadership is the gift, or in the gift, of Conservative Party members, who are by definition not representative of voters and probably will go to the right rather than to the centre.
But people always say that, forgetting that David Cameron won 2/3 of the vote of Conservative Party members in 2005.
That's true, but that, I think, was an idiosyncrasy. It came about because of a particular event where the purportedly anointed Conservative leader David Davis bombed completely on the public platform. He gave a terrible speech.
You're bringing back terrible memories for me, Oliver.
Okay, and David Cameron had a broader appeal than appeared to be the case at the time to pundits like me. I fear that, given the insurrection to the Conservatives' right flank, with Reform getting whatever it was, 5 MPs, that members will see a path back to power by allying themselves with that faction rather than where the voters are. I obviously did not vote Conservative, but I wish it were the case that there were rational, moderate parties vying for office from the centre-left and the centre-right, and I don't see that for some time.
See, I have a theory that the Conservative Party members have buyer's remorse about Liz Truss. They realise what they did, and I don't think they'll be in the mood to do it again. Sorry, Sorella.
That's interesting. You're in a better position than I am to judge that, but I suspect that the bulk of Conservative Party members believe that Liz Truss was driven out of office by the metropolitan media elite, the Bank of England, the financial markets, anyone bar their own perverse decision.
I don't believe that, but you may be right. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I think people want a bit of stability and a bit of normality and a bit of delivery after all that has come. And Oliver's right that, you know, a sensible system and one that will deliver is one where we, you know, debate calmly the shades of grey. But that's not what the media ecosystem and social media and so on reward. And that doesn't seem to be where the mind of the most visible parts of the Conservative Party is. And it's probably much less crack than going on GB News or going off and doing speaking tours in the US and saying mad things about culture wars, unfortunately. So it remains to be seen what they'll select. It is going to be a slog in opposition, especially the size of the opposition. But people, conversely, and people can hold two ideas in their head at the same time. They do want a bit of normality, but people do also like certainty from their politicians. And I know myself as somebody, you know, you try and get your mileage out of the solutions and explain in long form the trade-offs, but that's not what goes down particularly well sometimes in the media environment that we have.
Okay, let's move on to James in Ayr. Hello, James.
Yeah, good evening, and good evening. This question is mainly directed to the Irish member of your panel, but I'd appreciate other comments as well. My understanding is that in Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin, yet again, were the most popular party. Demographics in Northern Ireland suggest to me that won't change. Like the people of Scotland, the people of Northern Ireland had Brexit visited upon them, which they did not vote for. Additionally, in the Republic of Ireland, Sinn Féin is also a very powerful party. Do not all of these trends suggest that eventually Ireland will unite and will become an independent country within the EU?
Well, let's come to Claire first.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely closer than it has been probably at any time before, although still some time off. The main driver is that, as you identify, James, has been Brexit, I suppose, and just the fact that relationships were brought down to ground zero, and it made people think in a serious way about how we relate to each other on the island and to this island that we're on at the moment. If you look at and again, demographically, there is a pattern in Northern Ireland, but demographic isn't destiny. There's still a big group of people in the middle who will make a rational decision based on the prospectus put in front of them. And the bottom line is, it's the people we have to unite, not the territory. And people aren't, a sufficient number of them are not yet reconciled to the idea. That is the job of people like me who wish to see Irish unity, to persuade people to put forward a prospectus. But there's no point in pretending there isn't an enormous amount of work still in front of us to set out to people a little bit more clearly what it will mean, and to use that process as a means of reconciling people in Northern Ireland who are still in very different places.
Is it true to say nowadays that you can't be simplistic and say, well, all Catholics are in favour of a united Ireland and all unionists are in favour of staying? I mean, I suppose if you're a unionist, you would want to stay with the UK, but I mean, I'm sure there are Protestants who actually think the idea of a united Ireland would be good, just as the opposite.
There absolutely are, and that's the job, actually, to make it not a sort of an accident of birth, whether you favour Irish unity or the union, to make it a community of interest that people are buying into for rational reasons. And more people, I mean, the fact is, because of, I suppose, the community you grow up in and the school you go to and the clubs you attend and so on, it does tend to shape your outlook, and that's why there's a strong link between your I suppose your religious background and your view on this. But it is definitely changing. There are many people who and again, the Brexit vote showed that. It didn't neatly break down the simple way of looking at it, is that nationalists voted Remain and unionists voted Brexit. But if you drill down, it's absolutely not the case. But that is the job of a party like mine, that's rooted in both aspiration to a new Ireland but anti-sectarianism as well, to make it not just about piling up all the nationalists and just tipping it over 50% plus one. That's not how you build a modern pluralist state. You need to get people bought into it. You don't want to just reverse partition and basically trap a very unhappy large minority. You have to do your best to persuade as many of those people as possible. And by the way, the job of persuasion is getting a lot easier. If you look at the dynamic economy in the Republic, if you look at its progressive foreign policy, if you look at the social change that's happening, by popular movement, that's very, very appealing to people of all demographic backgrounds in Northern Ireland.
Wasn't so appealing maybe 10 or 15 years ago when the Irish economy was tanking.
But it isn't now.
No,
it certainly isn't tanking now. And during that period of growth, which, by the way, hasn't been shared appropriately within the Republic. I've got a lot of, I want a social democratic New Ireland. I don't just want, the fourth greenfield. But at that same time, and all the things that happened in terms of social change, and as I say, Ireland's role on the world stage, Britain was having its Brexit nervous breakdown, and that really changed the outlook of very many people in Northern Ireland.
Well, Brexit has been mentioned more on this programme than I think any other one that I've done in the last few months. Right, very brief answers, if I can, from the other three of you. David?
Yeah, well, and Brexit has indeed destabilised a whole series of constitutional settlements where shared membership of the EU was a way, ironically, of protecting the UK. I mean, ever since John Major's time, the British government's position has been we not have a selfish interest in forcing people to stay in the union if they don't wish to be. I hope that the union will survive, but we can't force people into it. I think what you've just heard from Claire, however, is a very accurate account of what you'd be thinking if you were sitting in Dublin. You don't want to have a union if there's a significant group of people, a really unhappy minority, you're going to cause massive trouble. So if this is ever to happen,
well, this is one of the other myths, that everyone in Dublin wants to see United Ireland. That is simply not the case.
It would look like
polling consistently says there is a comfortable majority, although you never know what would happen in a referendum.
But you talk to people in the Irish government, and some of them will actually acknowledge the difficulties that would follow in all sorts of ways. Camilla?
I think just picking up on your discussion on Brexit, that's something that has created dynamics in all of the devolved nations. I mean, in Scotland, that was a big part of their independence movement, saying that, we actually do want to remain with closer ties to the EU, and why are we being dumped in this Brexit madness that we didn't really ask for? Obviously, changed again now with the kind of decline of SNP and Labour coming back to the fore in Scotland. But I think that Brexit vote, and while England was so preoccupied with that, that has had a change in the relationship between the different parts of the United Kingdom.
Oliver?
I think we are marginally closer to Irish unification for the reasons that Claire mentioned. Demography, as she said, is not destiny. And a great deal has changed over the past generation, coincident with and partly caused by the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, the famous Irish historian Conor Cruise O'Brien, who came out as a unionist in the end, though he had been a member of the Irish government, argued that Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution, the irredentist claim to the territory of Northern Ireland, was a colonialist push in itself. Well, he never foresaw that those would be rescinded. I think the case for Scottish separatism is quite different. That is going against a currency union that is clearly in the interests of Scotland. The Republic of Ireland is in a different position as a member state of the European Union, with an economy that, as Claire rightly corrected you on, is doing much better than it was 10, 15 years ago. I personally, it's not a widespread view, but I think its membership of the euro is a source of strength. So I think it is marginally closer than it would otherwise be.
OK. James, thank you very much for that question. We'll move on to another one in just a moment. It's 8:49.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:51. Let's go to Paul in Bolton. Hello, Paul.
Hello, everybody. I'm a working class person, and despite the reputation that working class Tories give working class people, we are not all ardent royalists. Now, tomorrow we're going to witness the class-ridden, pompous and unrelatable nonsense, as Jeremy Corbyn would call it, King's speech at the state opening of Parliament. Now, today, I think it was, or yesterday, the brilliant Labour MP, Clive Lewis, has had to swear again in order to become an MP, because he longs for a day when he doesn't have to do this to the King. Also, we all know why Sinn Féin MPs can't sit in the House of Commons. And personally, myself, last week I was shocked.
Well, because they choose not to.
So, well, yeah, but it's because they don't want to swear to the King. But I was also shocked last week to see how many MPs opted for the Bible in a non-church-going country, and the honours system, which promotes inequality, in my opinion.
OK, what's your question,
to the
Paul?
history books too. So basically, I want to say, do you all agree with me that these archaic traditions need modernising once and for all under Keir Starmer's government?
Right, just a bit of background to this. Clive Lewis, who's a Labour MP, was made to repeat the oath to be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law today, after saying during his original swearing-in that he was saying those words under protest. And meanwhile, it says here, Claire Hanna, that you've included protests in your swearings-in both last week and in 2019. Answer for that.
Well, as I said in 2019 and last week, we're in a situation where the first words I said in Parliament weren't true. I don't bear allegiance. I bear allegiance to the people of South Belfast. I'm not a royalist, and as the Good Friday Agreement provides for, you can be British or Irish or both. I'm an Irish person, and I with friendship and respect, I said the words that I am legally required to say to serve my constituents, and I wouldn't let those words get in the way of doing the job that I was elected to do. But I think it would be a lot more suitable to have a pledge of service to your constituents, something that fits with the Nolan principles, and absolutely have the pledge of allegiance for those members for whom that is true. But I think it is a relic that people like me have to go in and say something false.
Why weren't you made to do it again?
I said the words I had to say. I just contextualised them and explained that my that my politics were rooted in friendship between Britain and Ireland, but in the Good Friday Agreement and in service to the people who elect me in all of their diversity. And I have an extraordinarily diverse electorate in South Belfast. But it shouldn't be the case. You should be in the same way as you're allowed to. I chose an affirmation rather than oath, because I certainly wouldn't swear those things on a Bible. But it is perverse that I had to say something false the first time I opened my mouth in that chamber.
Oliver?
I think the case with Clive Lewis was, as Claire intimates, that he elided certain words that needed to be said, which is why he had to do it again. Look, this is a lot of flummery, but I don't see harm in it. It's actually a lot of flummery, much of which is of recent origin rather than historic. But I don't see harm in it with a democracy that has an unwritten constitution, and particularly looking at what is happening in the United States, which we've discussed earlier, I don't see harm in the forms of democracy, the ceremonies of democracy, as well as the substance of democracy. And the questioner referred to the swearing and the affirmation. I think a very substantial number of MPs did not make a religious swearing as they became MPs. That's a reflection of a more pluralistic society, which I welcome. So I think a democracy can adapt perfectly sensibly.
Camilla?
I think it's tricky because once you start taking away these bits of tradition, where do you stop? There's so much of the way our Parliament functions and the House of Lords functions and the Commons that are kind of steeped in history and tradition. And that's sort of part of what makes up our democracy, I think, the kind of long traditions that we're still honouring today. So I can see why some people individually find these words problematic, but I think it's important to kind of honour some of these traditions, kind of for the sake of the tradition.
David?
Yeah, I think these traditions are pretty innocuous, really. And to be honest, if that's part of our history that helps to hold a constitutional democracy together, then we should all respect it. However, I think it was Queen Elizabeth I, after all the fraught circumstances of the Reformation, said that she would not make a window into men's souls. We don't have to inquire into what is happening inside someone's mind if they're going through these rituals and traditions.
OK, Paul, thank you for that. A final text question from Thomas in Cumbria, and I do need very short answers to this one. GPs are now being told to talk about climate change with their patients because it's a public health concern. Why can't doctors just keep it simple and, when I can actually see them, tell me why I'm ill? The Royal College of Physicians has produced an 11-page green toolkit for its members, telling them that health professionals can help their communities understand how climate change will affect their health and how to protect themselves. Oliver?
I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, the issue of public health became literally the most vital subject with a pandemic that was not foreseen at all. And we discovered during the course of it that many people were subject to misinformation and disinformation about the safety of vaccines. So, yes, it's a pressing public health concern. Why on earth should GPs not raise it?
David?
I think GPs are under so much pressure that I'm just not sure they've got the time or capacity to get into it. Of course, if they're having people suffering from heat stroke, they may want to reflect on why it's happening. But if people are so desperate to see the GP, they just want to get on with the medical treatment.
Claire.
Yeah, there's definitely, of course, there's pressure and people are desperate to see, but it is a public health issue. Air quality ruins the life and health of very many people, and doctors are trusted people. But a lot of the things that will get us out of the climate problems, things like more active travel, are things that are good for our health as well. So there's probably a win-win, but I appreciate there are huge pressures on their time.
And Camilla.
I think it sounds like someone at the Royal College of Physicians has a bit too much time on their hands. And I think for hard-pressed GPs who are trying to get through all their patients, do their patients the best they can, they probably have better things to do than read 11-page guides on green advice.
Right, let's move on to our fun question. It's from Joshua in Leeds. Loads of celebrities have been paying tribute to Gareth Southgate today after he quit as England manager, including the man who wrote the play about him, James Graham. Who else from public life at the moment deserves a stage show depicting their interesting life? Well, all four of you, obviously. Oliver Kamm.
A playwright who died very recently, a very noted playwright, Trevor Griffiths, was a Marxist who wrote an ITV drama in the 1970s called Bill Brandt, about a Labour MP rebelling against his own right-wing government. It's never been shown again, but it was gripping television. Ideologically, absolute nonsense, but gripping television. In the light of that, I would suggest Jeremy Corbyn, who's an interesting chap.
Camilla.
The name that sprung to mind for me was Nigel Farage. I thought we could start with his one-man campaign against the EU, to the psychodrama of the Brexit years, and then, of course, his colourful personal life. I think that would make for great watching.
Claire.
I think so much of public life has been stranger than fiction. Some of what we've seen, if it was a Netflix series, you would have switched it off years ago. So I'm not sure if the stage can match a lot of the lives and politics that we have in front of us.
Was that your answer? Are you going to give me a name?
No.
Honestly. David.
Well, I think David Attenborough is an important figure in public life, and he's had a fantastic and fascinating life. He's visited so many different places, and he got a standing ovation when he went to Wimbledon, and I think we would love going to see a play about him.
Okay, no, it's a very good suggestion. I interviewed David Attenborough once. I don't get nervous before interviews, but I really was before that one. He was such a lovely man. Anyway, on tomorrow's panel, we have new MPs, 4 newly elected MPs for the first time tomorrow evening. We have Satvir Kaur from Labour, Lincoln Jopp from the Conservatives, Bobby Dean from the Liberal Democrats, and Robin Swan from the Ulster Unionists. And for those asking, we did also invite Reform UK's new MPs to join us. But they're not. Anyway, I'm sure they will at some point. Thank you all to all 4 of you for coming on the programme today. Now, in a moment, we are going to turn our attention to the condition of ADHD. Online tests that may diagnose children and young people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder faster has been recommended for use by the NHS. So this provoked a question. How difficult is it to get your child diagnosed with ADHD? What are the barriers? What's been your experience, and what difference has it made when they've got the diagnosis? 0345 6060 973. I know we talked about this some time ago and we were absolutely deluged with calls, so I promised to do it again, and that's what we're going to do over the next hour here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Plaid Cymru MP Liz Saville-Roberts has told LBC Vaughan Gething's brought devolution to disrepute in Wales. The First Minister's resigned after 4 of his ministers stepped down. Bronwyn Weatherby is LBC's Wales correspondent and says he faced controversies ever since he took office.
Straight away, he faced a massive backlash over accepting a campaign donation from someone convicted of environmental